Hey kiddos, last lesson of the year. After you finish this, there's a comprehension check that you can go and take. You can take it as many times as you need to get the grade that you want, and you'll be good to go. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're looking at East Asia, and then we're going to have a second PowerPoint over Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Antarctica today. So in East Asia, we're looking at Japan, China. In Japan, Mount Fuji is a volcanic classified as an active with a low risk of eruption, and it's surrounded by 5 lakes. Here's a nice picture of Mount Fuji. The Gobi Desert. We mentioned this when we were looking at South Asia. The Gobi Desert stretches from northwest China into Mongolia. It's about 500,000 square miles. It's larger than Texas and California combined. It is because there is a mountain rain shadow that causes this, because it's surrounded by mountains. It's not able to get the rain that it needs to. And here's a picture of the Gobi Desert. Rivers are important for irrigation and hydroelectric power and transportation throughout the region. The Yellow River is 3,000 miles. It empties into the Yellow Sea. It's named for its yellow silt that it carries, so it has a yellowish color to it. It's also called China's Sorrow because it floods the regions frequently. It causes terrible floods that devastate the region. So here's a picture of the Yellow River. Then there's the Yangtze River, the longest river in all of Asia. It's about 3,900 miles. It's a major trade route. Most rivers cause flooding at some level. And there's also the West River. There's some pictures for you. Moving into some of the history that has surrounded China. The Chinese Empire came to an end in 1911 when a nationalist revolution led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Manchu dynasty. Then in 1927, Chiang Kai-shek set up a nationalist government, but his rival communist Mao Zedong gained huge support from peasants. So this really became a peasant rebellion. During World War II, nationalists and the communists successfully together resisted Japan. So while this battle was going on, let me go back. While that battle was going on, they literally stopped what they were doing, fought Japan, and then this battle here, they stopped what they were doing, fought Japan, and then went back to war after they defeated Japan. In 1949, the communists set up the People's Republic of China on the mainland, and the nationalists fled to the island of Taiwan and set up the Republic of China. And this is an island here that's still something that China claims as their territory, but then we're also allied with Taiwan, and we tend to support their cause for independence from China. In World War II, by the looking at how Japan was involved with it, by the early 20th century, Japan had become a major power and continued to expand their empire. They were jealous of the rest of the world, the United States included, spreading, imperializing. While they're an island, they did imperialize some into mainland Asia, but then also they wanted to be able to expand more. So on December 7th, 1941, there was a surprise attack on the U.S. base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. It brought the U.S. into World War II. In response, after a prolonged conflict and a very deadly conflict and a costly conflict, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It ended with the defeat of Japan, and they surrendered in 1945. So here's some pictures. The historical scenes. FDR signed the Declaration of War against Japan. One of the atomic bombs. Then looking at Korea, it is a cultural bridge between Japan and the mainland of Asia. So you can see China, and then it is a peninsula here to where Japan is able to connect with the rest of mainland Asia. The Kingdom of Sia ruled Korea as a unified state until 936, when it was overthrown by the Koryo dynasty. Military rulers took power in the late 1100s, but were then eventually conquered by the Mongols. Korea is a peninsula. It's controlled by China and Japan throughout history. This is one of the first areas that Japan went in and imperialized. China has also had its fair share of control on the Korean peninsula. The northern part was eventually controlled by the Soviet Union. The southern half was supported by the United States, and went into a civil war. In 1950, the Korean troops from the north invaded South Korea, starting the Korean War. The war ended in 1953 with a treaty that divided the peninsula along this parallel here, this line here, which is very heavily fortified. The military's there. We remember watching about this area whenever we watched the Inside North Korea video earlier. The population of the region, 1.5 billion people, 1.3 billion in China, and these numbers are a little old, so they're going to be a little bit higher. There's special administrative regions in China, so Hong Kong, Macau. These are, they're called economic zones, to where they have more freedom in these regions than they do else in the rest of the country. Hong Kong just was recently was given back to China. So it is a province of China, but it is a special economic zone to where they let capitalism actually thrive in the city while the rest of the country is communist. Japan has 127 million. Like I said, these numbers are a little outdated. North Korea is 22.9 million. South Korea 48. Mongolia 2.6 million. And Taiwan is 22.7 million. 1 out of 5 people in the world lives in China, so it is very heavily populated. Most populated country in the world. 94% of it belong to the Han ethnic group. Mainly live in eastern and southern China. The rest of the people belong to about 50 different ethnic groups. And then there's non-Chinese people that live in the north and the west. 90% of the population crowded on only 1/6 of the land. Remember, there's desert in all of these different regions. Most live in the fertile valleys and plains along the Huanghe, Changshan, and Shi. In these areas, population density is more than 518 people per square mile, and the population is scarcest in the west, with about 30% of people living in cities. The impacts of 1 billion plus people, the population may grow faster than the food supply. This is something that the United States actually contributes a lot to China. They buy a lot of food from us to support their population. There was, at one point, a 1 child per couple policy as an effort to reduce population growth. This was abolished in 2015, but one of the problems that came from this is that the Chinese people preferred to have sons so they could continue their legacy and their name. So they would put all of the girls that they had up for adoption, and enough of their kids would not be adopted. It's a problem that plagued the region and still plagues the region to this day. The largest cities in the regions are Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Osaka, and several others. A lot of the largest cities in the world are in this region. So some temples, some pictures. You can see the Forbidden City, Shanghai. Tokyo. You see, it's very modern and industrialized. Tokyo is very capitalistic. Here's the Umeda Sky Building in Osaka, Japan. Seoul, South Korea. So in China, there's many different dialects. However, most do speak Mandarin as the main dialect for the country. But then there's lots of different dialects that root from the different cultures inside of China. The written language is based on ideograms or pictorial characters, and each one carries a meaning. To read a newspaper, you need to know at least 2,000 to 3,000 different characters. To have a solid grasp of language, you need to know at least 25,000 characters. Japanese and Korean languages are related to Chinese. So the different religions in the region, they do have Buddhism, Shintoism, Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam. We did talk about Buddhism before. It is a religion that originated in India. It grew into an important religion in China by the 300s. It influenced Confucianism, Taoism, and its important ideas include rebirth and the end of the rebirth cycle. Shintoism is a native of Japan, and as once its official state religion. It's a form of animism. It involves the worship of kami, or translated to mean sacred spirits, which take the form of things and concepts important to life, such as wind, rain, mountains, trees, rivers, and fertility. After World War II, Shinto lost its status as of state religion, but some Shinto practices and teachings, once given a great deal of prominence during the war, are no longer taught nor practiced today, and others remain largely as everyday activities, like the Japanese New Year, that few identify with religious connotations. So here's some pictures of significant architecture for their religion. Their shrines. Confucianism is based on the teachings of Confucius. While it's classified as a religion, it's more of a philosophy. A Chinese philosopher who lived from 551 to 479 BC believed in respect for the past and one's ancestors. So this meant that children should obey their parents. Parents should obey the government and emperor. And it stressed the importance of educating and being educated. Then looking at Taoism, it's based on the teaching of Lao Tzu, 6th century BC, believed in the importance of preserving and restoring harmony in the individual and the universe. Thought government should leave people alone and do as little as possible. This was really focused on the individual should be seeking harmony with nature. In communist governments in North Korea and China, most don't allow them to have religions, or they're strongly discouraged. But many people have held on to some of their traditional beliefs. So some more pictures from the region. Great Wall of China. Looking at Hong Kong. Notice how different Hong Kong is than most of the other Chinese pictures that we've seen. It is a very industrialized place. Capitalism is allowed to flourish. And more recently, as the government of China has started cracking down on some of the personal liberties that people have in Hong Kong, the people that have been free in the region have been fighting back. And there's been a lot of protests in Hong Kong against the government. So switching gears, we're now going to look at Southeast Asia and Oceania. And then also Antarctica with that. And then we've wrapped up our study of the world. So looking at Southeast Asia and Oceania and Antarctica, so the mainland and the islands. So we're talking about this region. I need to turn the pin on. So we are talking about this region here. That I'm going to change the color of the pin so you can see it. Is what we're talking about. So all of these islands in this region here. There's two peninsulas here. You can see the one that Vietnam is on here, and then Malaysia and Thailand make up the second. The Indo-Chinese Peninsula, which is the rectangular shape. The Malay Peninsula, which is the narrow strip of land. Those two ones that we were talking about. Most of the islands are found in archipelagos, which means there's lots of islands that make up the region. The Philippines and the islands of Indochina are part of the Malay one. And I find this picture really interesting. People are choosing to live on this island that seems to have no resources, but they are also piled there. So there's so many people that they're having to live in some desperate places. And while I'm saying resources, I mean, they can fish and get fish from out here, but there's generally nothing, or there would be no place for them to hide if the sea level were to rise. The Annamese Cordillera runs north to south on the mainland. On the islands, most of the mountains are part of the volcanic Ring of Fire, which is the part of the world that runs through the Pacific that has lots of volcanoes. There are lots of rivers throughout the region as well. The Mekong River starts in China and runs through several Southeast nations. It forms a wide delta here on the Vietnam's coast. There's a lot of fish. If you look how long and large this river is, it's vital for transportation to get resources up through the region, and so they can trade out here in the ocean and get it elsewhere. Large fish. So there's fertile soil due to the volcanic activities and all the flooding that happens. There's fishing, petroleum, tin, gems. All of these natural resources are what's available to most Southeast Asian countries. Now switching gears, let's look at Australia. So Australia is a unique feature that it is both a continent and a country. There's mountains that divide the Great Dividing Range. There's also the Central Lowlands. So here's the Great Dividing Range. Central Lowlands, you can see there's also the Western Plateau, which covers nearly 2/3 of Australia, or it's called the Outback. There's three deserts, if I can speak, that cover much of the region: the Great Sandy, Great Victoria, and the Gibson. And there's very large rock formations. Nice picture of kangaroos. Here's an emu. The koalas. Dingoes. Platypuses. Crocodiles. There's a nice crocodile farm. So another thing that Australia is known for is the Great Barrier Reef. It's off the northeastern coast. It's made up of coral formed by the limestone skeletons of tiny sea animals. There's long strips of coral covered land that is home to an array of brilliantly covered fish and underwaters. And this is one of the things that people get upset with global warming about is it's killing and it's the trash and all the pollution in the ocean is killing the Great Barrier Reef, which sustains so much life in our oceans, and it's something that people are trying to protect. So here's some pictures from the Great Barrier Reef. Some more kind of an overview. Some fish. So some of the natural resources, 10% of the land is arable. One of the world's leading producers of wheat, cattle, and sheep. One of the world's leading producers also of beef, mutton, lamb, and wool. So if you're thinking about, I don't know, UGG is a brand that is gets a lot of its wool from Australia. And they also have all of these precious metals at the you can see there. Oceania is divided into three major island groups based on the location and how the islands were formed and the cultures of its inhabitants. Looking at the Melanesia, North and East Australia, Micronesia, north of Melanesia and south of Japan, and Polynesia, or from Midway Island into North New Zealand in the south. If we're thinking about some Polynesian areas, Hawaii could be considered Polynesian. A lot of these cultures, you could see Moana is something that depicts some of their ancestral cultures. So there's high islands formed as a result of tectonic plates colliding, and this is what makes up the Ring of Fire that I was talking about earlier. It's known for its earthquakes and volcanic activity because of these tectonic plate shifts. There's lots of volcanoes, islands being formed along these regions, and there's also earthquakes that happen because of the tectonic plates shifting. There's low islands that began as a result of volcanic eruptions. Coral has also grown into along the rim of an underwater volcano, creating a ring-shaped island. At the center of a shallow lagoon, there's low-lying waves that wash them out, and little soil and natural resources are on them. So here's an atoll in the Pacific Ocean. You can see how this is how islands really start to form. Hawaii is something if you looked at an image of Hawaii as it shifts, new islands are being formed, and the furthest island away is one that's actually being eroded by the ocean. There's also continental islands, which are made up of rock that has risen from continental shelves on the ocean floor. It's not formed by volcanoes, but many have active volcanoes because of the plates shifting. There's mineral found on the islands, including oil, gold, nickel, and copper. Then looking at New Zealand, it's located 1,200 miles southeast of Australia. It's a group of mountainous islands. The North Island is the center of the islands, is a plateau of volcanic stone crossed by a chain of volcanic peaks. There's freshwater lakes, hills, sheep, dairy cattle. It's also dominated by the southern islands, dominated by the Southern Alps. If you like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, those movies were filmed there. Here's some pictures. Some of the natural resources they do have fast flowing rivers because of the mountains that make up the islands. There's steam from volcanic hot water or geothermal energy that they're able to use. Coal, natural gas. They do export sheep and wool products. There's pine forests and Pacific Ocean fish. Now switching to Antarctica, or a vast white plateau. It's twice the size of Australia. Ice, as much as 2 miles thick in some places, covers about 95% of the continent. There's transantarctic mountains, and the Antarctic Peninsula divide the continent into two regions. East, the high flat plateau, and the west, where the land is mostly below sea level. The greatest resource there is the scientists who conduct research. Research weather patterns and observe the sun and stars without obstruction. They also look for the effect of human industrialization on the Earth's ozone layer there. They have lots of mineral resources and a wealth of sea resources, especially krill, which could help feed the world's population one day. But then also, if you've ever watched Whale Wars, they go and film those shows down in this region to protect the killer whales. So some pictures from Antarctica. So the climate and vegetation of Australia, does have a desert region. The moisture is blocked by subtropical high pressure air masses. There is a steppe region too that surrounds the desert. It's wet and dry seasons. And then the coastal regions, the southern coast have a Mediterranean climate. The northeast has a humid subtropical climate. And the southeast have a marine west coast climate. In Oceania, the north of the Tropic of Capricorn, there's tropical rainforests, wet and dry seasons. There's typhoons, which are like hurricanes. In New Zealand, there's the marine west coast, except in the mountain regions. But then there's also rain throughout the year and fairly mild temperatures. Then looking at Antarctica, it's one of the coldest places on Earth, and also one of the highest and driest continents. The plateau is drier than Australia's deserts. Dryness makes the air even colder. During the long winter, temperatures could drop to negative 100. There's also ice is always shifting, moving and inching, getting closer to the ocean. In the warmer, moister parts of the continent, it moves more quickly, often breaking into pieces. Between pieces, there's huge cracks called crevices, and they develop into larger regions that people can get down into. There's a small area lies in the tundra climate zone. The temps may reach almost 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and mosses and lichens are able to grow. And that wraps up this lesson. You can go and take your comprehension check as many times as you need to get the score that you need. And that wraps up everything that you need to do for this class. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a great rest of your week.